Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a pretty interesting commentary piece from the South Asia Journal. It just came out, April 20th, 2025.
That's right. It's titled Speaking Eye to Eye with India.
And the author is Sheikh Hasina. He's the editor-in-chief of eSouth Asia. And, he comes from a background as a writer, journalist, educator, so quite a bit of experience there. So our plan today is really to unpack what Asan is arguing here. We'll look at the historical stuff he brings up, the current dynamics he sees between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Yeah, he touches on quite a few big themes. You've got the whole legacy of colonial divisions. The Mughal period gets a look in what he sees as rising anti-Muslim sentiment in India.
Right, and also this shift he describes in the India-Bangladesh relationship, specifically after what the article calls the July Revolution in Bangladesh back in 2024.
Which the piece links to the fall of Sheikh Hasina's government.
Exactly. Okay,
Yes.
so let's start where the article starts. What's the opening point?
Well, it kicks off by stressing regional cooperation, how important that is for South Asia. It brings up Nobel laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus, who has apparently been saying this for a while, that cooperation is key for economic self-reliance in the region.
Okay, that makes sense. A familiar theme.
Yeah, but then it adds another layer. It mentions the World Bank's view. Apparently, the World Bank thinks that if India and Pakistan just normalized their trade, they could basically achieve self-development without needing so much external aid.
Huh. So right away it sets up this idea of potential, but also implies there are roadblocks, right? If it's so beneficial, why isn't it happening?
Exactly. And that leads straight into the next point. What's stopping this cooperation? The article points the finger directly at the hostility between India and Pakistan.
Okay.
It argues this isn't just, current politics. It's rooted in really deep historical distrust, animosity between Hindus and Muslims.
And it labels this a colonial legacy, doesn't it? Stemming from the British partition.
It does. Explicitly links it to the creation of Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan, which back then included what's now Bangladesh. The author uses this phrase, a deep psychological affliction, to describe how this hatred has persisted.
Right. So how does the Mughal period fit into this historical argument?
Well, the article then sort of pivots to the Mughal era. It calls it India's Muslim period pretty straightforwardly. But the core argument is that the British actively shaped how Hindus perceived this period. It claims they convinced the Hindus that the Mughals were oppressive rulers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea is that a negative view of the Mughal past, maybe pushed by the colonizers, fuels present-day tensions.
That seems to be the implication, yeah, that this historical narrative is part of the problem.
And the article tries to counter that narrative, doesn't it? What evidence does it offer?
It brings up a couple of things. First, economics. It says that even as the Mughal Empire was declining, the Indian subcontinent held something like 26% of the world's GDP. That's quite significant.
Wow.
And second, it claims that Hindus weren't excluded. They apparently held high positions in the Mughal administration, even in the army.
So the author's painting a picture of more inclusive rule.
Definitely. The piece argues the Mughals actually supported both Hindu and Muslim arts and culture. Less oppressive, more patrons of a combined culture.
So what does the article think is the real way to judge rulers from that time?
It suggests we should look past the religion of the rulers and focus on, well, economic development and the standard of living for ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen.
Okay.
And the claim is that these groups, farmers and artisans, actually did well under the Mughals, regardless of whether they were Hindu or Muslim. It even throws in this detail about some supposed British accounts mentioning there weren't any beggars around back then.
So a very different picture of the Mughal era than the oppressive rulers idea. It really makes you think about how history gets written and, used.
Absolutely. It's setting up a direct challenge to a particular historical narrative.
Okay, so bringing it to the present. The article then makes some really strong claims about contemporary India.
It does. It takes a sharp turn. The argument is that modern Indian politics has undone centuries of what it calls peaceful cohabitation.
And turned India into I think the phrase was hate land against Muslims. That's incredibly strong.
Very strong. And it argues this isn't just rhetoric. It says government policy, art, culture, and especially movies, because they reach so many people, are all sort of pushing towards hatred and persecution of Muslims.
Does it give specific examples?
Yes, it zooms in on one particular film called Chhabba. According to the article, this film gives a really distorted image of Muslims. The author sees it as basically revealing an anti-Muslim bias that's embedded in what the article calls Hindutva ideology.
Okay, and Hindutva ideology, just for clarity, the article is using that term to refer to a specific kind of Hindu nationalism.
Yes, that's how the article frames it. And it doesn't mince words about the film. It calls Chhabba an X-ray report of the Hindi subconscious and even propaganda of the ruling BJP.
Wow. How does the article say Muslims are actually depicted in this movie?
It describes it quite vividly. It says Muslims are shown as ugly and barbaric. Things like dark skin, heavy beards, coal-lined eyes.
Okay.
And this is contrasted, apparently, with Hindus who are shown as graceful and impeccably dressed.
So very stark visual stereotyping.
Exactly. The author interprets this as exposing not just bias, but a kind of primitive mindset.
Hmm.
And it gets worse. The article alleges the film goes beyond just demonizing. It claims it practically fantasizes about Muslim extermination, suggesting it shows, quote, 101 ways to kill Muslims.
That's incredibly disturbing, if accurate.
It is. And the article also claims the heroism of the Hindu characters is blown way out of proportion, almost like a fantasy.
So the author sees this film as more than just entertainment. It's a symbol.
A potent symbol, yeah. A
Yeah.
symbol of communal hatred and bigotry that the author believes has been building in India for decades, really since independence.
Which leads the author to ask this question. How did India get here? How did the educated people of the 20th century end up in what the article describes as a regressive, hate-driven society now?
Exactly. And the article then draws a direct line to Narendra Modi. It claims his campaign of anti-Muslim violence, which the article says started in Gujarat, has now become a nationwide phenomenon.
And this animosity, according to the piece, extends beyond India's borders.
Yes. It claims things are so tense that for some in India, even just having Muslim-majority neighbors is intolerable. It then talks about a specific incident, a reported failed surgical strike on Pakistan, and an Indian fighter jet crashing.
Okay.
The article interprets this as a kind of failed fantasy of conquest, a frustration. And it suggests this frustration is made worse because India can't just dominate Pakistan, mainly because Pakistan also has nuclear weapons.
So Pakistan remains the designated enemy, reinforced by this frustration.
That's the argument, that Pakistan's nuclear deterrent fuels this animosity among those the article identifies as Hindutva nationalists.
And the language used.
Mm-hmm.
The article says something about the word Pakistan itself.
Yeah, this is interesting. It claims that in the rhetoric of Indian Hindu nationalists, Pakistan has basically become a code word, a euphemism for Muslim. The author even says that calling someone Pakistan is seen as a worse insult in India today than just calling them Muslim, and that Modi supporters use it like that.
Wow. So it shows how nationalism and religious identity can get completely blurred in political language.
Precisely. It's presented as a way to dehumanize and insult.
Okay, now the article shifts geography a bit, moving to the India-Bangladesh relationship. What's the trigger for this shift in focus?
The trigger is August 5th, 2024, what the author calls the fall of Sheikh Hasina's autocratic regime in Bangladesh.
Right, the event the article labels the July Revolution.
Yes. And the core argument here is that this event weakened India's influence in Bangladesh, what the article terms its shadow colonial influence.
So less Indian influence in Bangladesh now.
That's the claim. And as a result, the article says Indian media and maybe policymakers, Delhi South Bloc, have started paying more attention to Bangladesh, maybe shifting some focus from Pakistan. It alleges that Delhi is now poking its nose into Bangladesh's affairs more overtly.
And it mentions some specific diplomats.
It does. It names Veena Sikri and Riva Ganguly and characterizes them as spreading stories about, quote, khilafat in Bangladesh. The author basically dismisses these as scare tactics, like the boy who cried wolf, but wrapped up in Hindutva ideology.
And there's a point about Bengali culture, too, isn't there?
Yeah, this is quite nuanced. The article talks about an elite Bengali Hindu culture that it says was constructed during the British Raj, during the Bengal Renaissance. The author argues that this specific elite culture has been sort of presented, maybe incorrectly, as the ancient 1,000-year-old culture of Bangladesh itself.
And the consequence of that.
Is that many educated Bangladeshis, according to the article, have kind of absorbed this idea and adopted a posture of deference towards India, like looking up to India culturally and politically.
So the article is pretty critical of India's role.
Very critical. It basically says India is constantly meddling in Bangladesh's internal business, but if anyone in Bangladesh comments on India's issues, that's completely taboo.
There's also a point about religious minorities, right? India as a guardian.
Yes. The article brings up the idea that India is often seen, or maybe present itself, as the sole guardian of Hindus in Bangladesh.
Right.
And it claims the Awami League Party acted like India's local manager for Hindu votes when they were in power.
But the article sees the new government, Dr. Yunus's government, as different.
Completely different on this point. It highlights that this government is the first one in Bangladesh to actually question India's right to act as a guardian for any religious or ethnic group within Bangladesh.
So a push for more sovereignty.
Exactly. The author frames this as the birth of a self-respecting Bangladesh, a turning point.
And how does the article say India has reacted since August 5th?
It claims that Indian officials and media quickly went back to talking about minority oppression in Bangladesh, an old narrative revived.
But this time, there was a response from Bangladesh.
A significant one, according to the article. It highlights that Dr. Yunus's press secretary, Shafiqul Alam, actually pushed back. He apparently raised concerns about the oppression of minorities within India.
Ah, turning the tables.
Precisely. The article calls this a historic first, a direct challenge.
And how is that received within Bangladesh, according to the piece?
Well, the article claims it ruffled some feathers among what it calls Bangladesh's cultural neo-elites. It suggests these elites kind of miss the days of closer Indian influence.
Okay, so how does the article wrap things up? What's the concluding thought?
It ends on a fairly hopeful note, actually. It talks about a new Bangladesh driven by Gen Z. This generation, the author believes, wants a truly democratic, just, inclusive, and sovereign nation, a break from the past.
And there's a postscript, too, isn't there? A clarification.
Yes, an important one. The author makes it clear that when they criticize India in the piece, they mean India's power structures, its government, and what they call sectarian thugs. They specifically express sympathy and solidarity with the ordinary people of India, saying they are often oppressed and marginalized too.
Right, so just to quickly recap the main thrust of this commentary.
Okay, so the author argues the India-Pakistan conflict has deep historical roots tied to colonialism and contested views of the Mughal era. Then, a strong critique of contemporary India, alleging rising anti-Muslim sentiment fueled by politics and culture, using that film Chhabba as a prime example.
And finally, this analysis of the shifting India-Bangladesh relationship post-August 2024, portraying Bangladesh as asserting more independence from Indian influence.
Exactly. And, it's crucial for our listeners to remember this entire deep dive is based only on the arguments and perspectives presented in this specific commentary piece by Masquith Hassan in the South Asia Journal. We're just unpacking his views here.
Absolutely. And it definitely leaves you with some big questions. Thinking about the history, the author's strong stance. What are the real pathways towards better cooperation and understanding in South Asia? It seems so complex.
It does, and it really underscores that question. How much do these historical narratives and the way they're told and interpreted shape everything happening today between these countries and communities?
Definitely food for thought. Some very significant points raised in this piece for us and hopefully our listeners to consider.